The air at the edge of the world had a taste. It was a compound of fine silica dust, the faint, acrid tang of sun-baked creosote, and the sterile exhaust of industrial-grade climate control systems, warring with a relentless desert sun. This was the antechamber to Cerberus Deep Range, a place that did not officially exist. Nestled in a fold of the Nevada high desert so barren and hostile, it seemed to reject the very concept of life. The Entry Control Point, or ECP, was a monument to brutalist architecture and paranoid engineering. Its walls were monolithic slabs of reinforced concrete, the color of bleached bone, angled to deflect blasts and channel intruders into kill zones so perfectly calculated they were things of geometric beauty. Above, automated sentry platforms sat dormant in armored cowlings, their multispectral optics sleeping behind blast-proof shutters, dreaming of trajectories and heat signatures. The only sound, beyond the ceaseless, scouring wind, was the low-frequency hum of buried power conduits, a vibration felt more in the bones than in the ears. Into this carefully curated zone of absolute control rolled a machine of profound mediocrity. It was a beige rental sedan, its flanks coated in a uniform layer of ochre dust that rendered its make and model almost irrelevant. It was a vessel of anonymity, a four-wheeled shrug in a place built on the bedrock of identity and clearance. It came to a quiet stop behind a hulking armored transport that was currently disgorging a squad of grim-faced Air Force security forces, their gear rattling with a sound of professional lethality. The sedan waited, its engine a barely audible tick, its presence an anomaly, an error in the pattern of military green and tactical gray. It seemed to wait with a patience that was itself a form of defiance in a place where urgency was the state religion. Inside the car sat a woman. If one were to describe her, the words that came to mind would be unremarkable and still. She was perhaps in her mid-30s, dressed in functional civilian clothing, dark, durable trousers, a plain gray blouse, and sturdy walking shoes. Her hair was a simple brown, tied back without ceremony. Her face, devoid of makeup, was composed. Her eyes focused not on the intimidating display of military hardware before her, but on some internal point of reference far beyond the concrete and the heat. She was not fidgeting. She was not checking her phone. She was simply occupying space, her stillness a stark contrast to the nervous energy of the young Marines manning the guard post, who shifted their weight from foot to foot, their eyes constantly scanning, their bodies coiled springs of trained readiness. She was a pool of calm water in the middle of a controlled hurricane. The master of this specific hurricane, the petty king of this concrete and razor-wire domain, was United States Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant Rex Hackett. Gunny Hackett was a man carved from the very granite of institutional tradition. He was not tall, but he was broad, his frame a testament to 2 decades of rigorous physical conditioning and a diet heavy on discipline. His face was a roadmap of his service, tanned to the consistency of worn leather by foreign suns, etched with lines of concentration and command. His high and tight haircut was a graying testament to regulation, and his jaw was a permanent fixture of belligerent resolve. His authority in this place was not merely procedural, it was atmospheric. It radiated from him like heat from a furnace, a palpable force that set the tone for every interaction within the 50-meter radius of his guard shack. He stood with his thumbs hooked into his web belt, observing the processing of the transport, his gaze a tool of measurement and judgment. When the armored truck finally cleared the final checkpoint and rumbled into the depths of the facility, Hackett's attention fell upon the beige sedan. It was an aesthetic offense, a violation of the unwritten code of martial seriousness that defined his world. He watched it roll forward to the painted yellow line, and his lip curled in a half-conscious sneer. Civilians. He tolerated them as a necessary evil, the scientists and technicians who built the exotic toys the real warriors used. But he did not respect them. In his binary world, you were either a trigger puller or a target, a sheepdog or a sheep. These people, with their soft hands and their advanced degrees, were, at best, well-educated sheep. He sauntered over, his boots crunching on the gravel with deliberate weight. He rapped his knuckles on the driver's side window, a sharp, impatient sound. The window slid down with a quiet electric hum. He leaned in, deliberately invading the driver's personal space, a classic tactic of intimidation. The air inside the car was cool and neutral, a stark contrast to the furnace blast outside. His eyes met hers. They were clear, intelligent, and utterly, unnervingly calm. They did not widen in fear or narrow in irritation. They simply registered his presence. "ID!" Hackett barked. It was not a request. It was a percussive command, a verbal assertion of his dominance over this piece of geography. The woman did not speak. She reached into a simple canvas bag on the passenger seat and produced a laminated card, holding it up for him to see. It was a Department of Defense civilian credential. The name read, Thorne, Heiress. Below the name, in bold letters, was a single, infuriating word, Doctor. Hackett squinted at it, his contempt growing. A doctor. He hated that. The military had doctors, real ones, who wore uniforms and knew how to apply a tourniquet under fire. Then there were these people, PhDs, who he was sure earned the title for writing 1,000-page papers on things no sane person cared about. He saw the title not as a mark of achievement, but as a claim to a status he did not recognize. "Dr. Thorne," he said, drawing the word doctor out, infusing it with a thick, syrupy sarcasm. "Doctor of what? Ancient history? Hurt feelings?" The two young Marines at the search station behind him snickered. They were his audience, his chorus, and he was performing for them, reinforcing the tribal boundary between the uniformed and the civilian. It was a small, petty act of theater, but it was essential to maintaining the world view that gave his life meaning. The woman's expression did not change. It was like watching a stone react to rainfall. Her voice, when it came, was even and low, devoid of any emotional inflection. "My access is authorized under Cerberus Protocol 7. Your scanner will verify." The mention of a specific protocol, especially one he did not immediately recognize, was a small spark on the dry tinder of his pride. He felt a flicker of irritation. She was not playing her part. She was supposed to be flustered, apologetic, perhaps a little intimidated. Instead, she was quoting regulations at him. It felt like a challenge, a subtle questioning of his absolute authority in this space. He straightened up, snatching the ID from her hand with more force than was necessary. He stalked back to the guard shack, swiped the card through the high-security reader, and stared at the screen. The screen flashed green, access granted, but the details were sparse, almost insultingly so. Name, Thorne, Heiress. Title, Doctor. Clearance level, Omega. Destination, Corps Command. There was no photo, no affiliation beyond a cryptic project code, Chimera. Omega. He'd never seen that designation before. It was above top secret. It was off the scale. It should have given him pause. It should have been a screaming red flag, a signal to de-escalate and proceed with professional caution. But Hackett's ego was a powerful filter, capable of distorting any data that contradicted his preconceived notions. He did not see a warning. He saw an anomaly that needed to be hammered back into place. He saw a civilian, a woman, using bureaucratic trickery to bypass the natural order of things. His world was built on a visible hierarchy, on the chevrons on a sleeve, the bars on a collar. Her authority was invisible, and therefore, to him, it was illegitimate. He walked back to the car and slapped the ID card down on the roof. "I don't care what the computer says. My ECP, my rules. We do a full vehicle inspection. Pop the trunk, doctor." The way he said the title made it an epithet, a deliberate, targeted insult. Dr. Thorne's gaze flickered from his face to the ID card lying on the hot metal of her roof. For the first time, a shadow of something passed through her eyes. It was not anger or fear. It was something colder, more analytical. It was the look of an engineer diagnosing a faulty component. "Gunnery sergeant," she said, her voice still perfectly level. "That course of action is not advisable. It will cause a significant delay that will be noted in your watch log and my after-action report." This was, to Hackett, the final straw. She had threatened him. She had invoked the one thing he truly despised: paperwork. The idea that this woman, this civilian, would file a report on him, a decorated Marine gunner, was so absurd, so offensive to the natural order, that it tipped him from professional belligerence into personal rage. "A report?" he snarled, leaning down so his face was inches from hers, his voice a low, menacing growl that had frozen the blood of lesser men on 4 continents. "Let me tell you what the report is going to say. It's going to say an unauthorized civilian attempted to gain entry to a secure facility using questionable credentials and a belligerent attitude. Now pop the trunk, or I'll have my Marines rip it off its hinges." He slammed his open palm down on the hood of the car. The loud, metallic bang echoed in the oppressive silence of the desert. It was a purely physical expression of his frustration, a primate's display of dominance. The young Marines shifted, their amusement curdling into discomfort. This was escalating beyond the usual hazing of a civilian contractor. The gunny was losing his temper. She did not flinch. She did not recoil. She did not raise her voice. She simply held his gaze. Her silence was a mirror, reflecting his own escalating fury back at him, amplifying it. He was a storm beating against a cliff face, and the cliff face was not moving. It was, for him, an intolerable state of affairs. He was about to speak again, to issue an order that would have irrevocably crossed a line, when the world ended. It began not with a sound, but with a feeling. A deep, seismic shudder that vibrated up through the soles of their boots, through the car's chassis, and into their teeth. Then came the noise. It was not the familiar roar of a jet or the crump of distant ordnance. It was a synthetic, soul-tearing screech, a digital scream broadcast from every speaker in the facility at maximum volume. It was the sound of a system in catastrophic failure. Simultaneously, the world went dark. The brilliant, punishing sunlight was blotted out as if by a colossal hand. The sky, a moment before a pale, washed-out blue, was now a roiling vortex of bruised purple and sickly green-black cloud. The wind, which had been a constant, abrasive pressure, became a solid wall of force, a microburst that struck the ECP with the force of a physical explosion. A loose supply pallet weighing several hundred pounds was lifted into the air and hurled against the concrete barrier, where it splintered into 1,000 pieces. Dust and gravel became a horizontal blizzard, reducing visibility to near zero. Then the lights inside the guard shack flickered, spasmed, and died, plunging them into a red-tinted gloom as the emergency backup system struggled to engage. Alarms began to blare, a dozen different klaxons and sirens, each screaming a different tale of disaster. Power failure, containment breach, network intrusion, perimeter fault. They overlapped into a meaningless cacophony of pure panic. The massive multi-ton main gate, which had been cycling open, froze halfway, its motors groaning in protest before falling silent. They were trapped. Worst of all were the sentry turrets. The automated defense platforms, suddenly cut off from their central command logic, rebooted into their default state. Autonomous engagement mode. Their armored cowlings retracted with a pneumatic hiss, and the barrels of their 30mm cannons began to cycle, their targeting lasers stabbing erratically through the dust storm like malevolent red eyes. They were no longer discriminating between friend and foe. They were hunting for targets, and everything that moved was now a target. Gunny Hackett was a product of the finest military training on the planet. He was conditioned for chaos. He had faced ambushes in Fallujah and IEDs in Helmand. But this was a different kind of chaos. This was not an enemy he could shoot. This was the system itself, the technological fortress he served, turning on its masters. His training screamed at him to act, to impose order. "Get on the horn to Central Command!" he bellowed over the wind and the alarms, his voice nearly swallowed by the gale. "Kill the power to the perimeter grid. Manual override now. Jacobs, Martinez, get your rifles on those turrets. If they slew towards us, you open fire." His orders were textbook. They were loud, they were authoritative, and they were utterly, hopelessly wrong. Shouting at a communication system that was offline was pointless. The manual override for the perimeter grid was inside the main power conduit, which was now behind a sealed blast door. And shooting at the armored turrets with 5.56mm rifles would be like throwing pebbles at a tank. It would do nothing but confirm to the turret's logic that they were under attack, triggering a lethal and overwhelming response. Hackett was a warrior trying to fight a ghost, a man of action rendered impotent by a crisis that required not muscle, but a profound and intricate understanding of the very systems that were collapsing around him. His men looked at him, their faces pale masks of fear and confusion, seeking a certainty he could no longer provide. The king of the concrete kingdom was watching his throne crumble into dust. In that moment of escalating failure, as Hackett's authority evaporated into the roaring wind, the source of his frustration made her move. Dr. Eris Thorne did not scramble out of her car. She exited with a fluid economy of motion that was unnerving in its grace. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she seemed oblivious to it. Her focus absolute. She moved to the passenger side, retrieved the canvas bag, and from it produced not a weapon, but a ruggedized, matte black laptop. She did not run for cover. She walked, with a calm, deliberate stride, directly toward the main control nexus for the ECP, a reinforced steel panel set into the wall of the guard shack. The targeting laser of the nearest sentry turret swept across her back, a fleeting crimson slash. One of the young Marines yelled a warning. She did not react. It was not bravery. It was a state of being so far beyond fear that the concept no longer had meaning. It was the calm of total comprehension. She knelt before the panel, her fingers flying over a small built-in keypad. A security plate hissed open, revealing a chaotic nest of fiber optic cables and blinking status lights, most of them angry red. She produced a specific interface cable from her bag, its connector head a bizarre, non-standard shape, and plugged it directly into a port marked with a symbol none of the Marines had ever seen before: a three-headed dog. The symbol of Cerberus. It was a diagnostic port, a digital skeleton key for the entire facility. Then she spoke. Her voice was not loud. It did not compete with the storm or the sirens. Yet, it cut through the noise with the impossible clarity of a diamond blade. It was a voice stripped of all emotion, a pure instrument of command. Gunnery Sergeant Hackett. He turned, stunned to hear his name spoken with such placid authority in the middle of the apocalypse. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were locked on her laptop screen, which now glowed with cascading lines of raw code. The cascade failure originated in Substation 7. It's created a recursive loop in the primary command server. The system is fighting itself, and it's losing. Your orders are tactically unsound and will result in our deaths in approximately 90 seconds when the turret capacitors reach full charge. Her words descended on the scene with the weight of prophecy. They were not an opinion. They were a statement of incontrovertible mathematical fact. Hackett and his men froze, their own panic momentarily eclipsed by the sheer, stunning audacity of her pronouncement. You, she continued, her fingers a blur on the keyboard, will take 2 of your men to the manual breaker panel behind that wall. You will need to force the access door. Inside, you will find a row of 6 primary circuit breakers. You will disengage the 3rd and 5th breakers simultaneously, not sequentially, simultaneously. This will isolate the perimeter defense grid from the corrupted central server. You have 60 seconds. She gestured with her head toward a plain steel door Hackett had always assumed was a utility closet. She had just given a United States Marine gunnery sergeant a direct, complex, and time-sensitive order. The foundations of Hackett's universe trembled. "Corporal," she said, her voice never changing its precise clinical tone, her eyes still on the screen. "The communications array is offline because the frequency controller is cycling through emergency bands. Take this." She held out a small metallic device from her bag. "Connect it to the base of the primary antenna. It will emit a handshake pulse that will force the controller to lock onto a stable, encrypted channel. You have 45 seconds. A young corporal, wide-eyed, simply stared at her for a second before his training kicked in. He snatched the device and ran into the howling gale, disappearing into the dust. Hackett was paralyzed by a conflict that raged within him, a war between a lifetime of ingrained hierarchy and the undeniable, terrifying competence of the woman kneeling in the dirt. His instincts screamed that he should not be taking orders from a civilian he had been berating moments before, but every word she spoke resonated with a truth so profound it bypassed his pride and spoke directly to his survival instinct. She was not guessing. She knew. "Gunnery Sergeant," she said, and this time there was a new edge to her voice, the barest hint of impatience, like the first crack in a glacier. "Move. Now." That was what broke the spell, the simple, unadorned imperative. He turned to his remaining men. "You heard her. Let's go. Martinez, get the pry bar." They ran, their movements clumsy with adrenaline but driven by a new, desperate hope. They had a mission. They had orders. For the first time since the chaos began, they had direction, and it had come from the most impossible of sources. As they slammed the heavy steel bar into the seams of the access door, Dr. Thorne continued her work. Her screen was a waterfall of diagnostic data and security protocols. She was not just observing the system's failure. She was deep inside it, wrestling with it. She was typing lines of code, forcing backdoors, killing corrupt processes, and rerouting power with the surgical precision of a master neurosurgeon. To the onlookers, it was a foreign language, a form of digital witchcraft. But in reality, it was a masterclass in the architecture of complex systems. She was not just a user of this technology. She was fluent in its native tongue. She was speaking to the ghost in the machine, and the ghost was listening. The turret's cannon began to hum, a rising, ominous whine that signaled its weapon systems were coming online. Its targeting laser, which had been sweeping randomly, now locked onto the guard shack. It had found its target. The low, rhythmic hum intensified, the sound of capacitors charging for a killing blow. 17 seconds, Gunnery Sergeant, Thorne said calmly, as if announcing the time. With a final, desperate heave, Hackett and his Marine burst through the access door. Inside, just as she had described, was a panel of heavy breakers. "Third and fifth!" Hackett roared. They each grabbed a heavy, insulated lever. "On my mark! 3, 2, 1, pull!" They threw their weight into it. The levers clunked down in unison. Outside, the terrible rising whine of the sentry turret abruptly died. Its laser winked out. The cannon drooped, returning to its inert, resting state. A collective, ragged breath of relief went through the small group. At the same moment, a crackle came from the communications panel. The young corporal had succeeded. A voice, laced with static but clear, came through. "ECP, this is Corps Command. What is your status, over? We have a full-blown systems cascade." Before anyone could answer, Thorne spoke into a tiny microphone pinned to her collar. "Corps Command, this is Chimera. I have control of the ECP network. The cascade is firewalled. I am currently purging the corrupted code and rebooting the local grid from a secure partition. Stand by." The name Chimera hung in the air, meaningless to the Marines. But the effect on the other end of the line was instantaneous. The frantic, panicked voice from Corps Command was replaced by a different one, a man whose tone was one of utter, deferential gravity. "Chimera confirmed. Command is yours. We are standing by for your instructions." The storm began to abate as quickly as it had arrived. The wind lessened, and the unnatural darkness began to recede, leaving a sky the color of a fresh bruise. The cacophony of alarms was silenced, one by one, replaced by the steady, reassuring hum of restored power. The lights flickered back on, not red this time, but a clean, sterile white. The crisis, which moments before had been an existential threat, had been contained, disarmed, and resolved by one woman with a laptop. Hackett and his men emerged from the breaker room, their faces streaked with grime and sweat. They looked at the woman who was now calmly unplugging her laptop. They looked at her not with suspicion or resentment, but with a profound, earth-shattering awe. They had just witnessed something impossible, a miracle of competence that had completely reordered their understanding of the world. It was into this stunned silence that the new sound arrived. The high-pitched whine of powerful turbines and the crunch of heavy tires. A convoy of 3 black, armored SUVs, their lights flashing, screamed up to the half-open gate and skidded to a halt. The doors of the lead vehicle flew open, and out strode a figure who commanded instant recognition. It was General Wallace, a 4-star Air Force general, the overall commander of the entire sector. His face was a thundercloud of anxiety. He was flanked by a team of heavily armed special forces, their weapons held at a low ready. Wallace's eyes swept the scene, taking in the damage, the dust, the stunned Marines. His gaze passed over Hackett without a flicker of recognition. It scanned the area, searching. Then it found her. It locked onto Dr. Aris Thorne, who was now standing, brushing dust from her trousers as if she had just finished a bit of light gardening. The general's entire demeanor changed. The frantic worry vanished, replaced by an expression of immense relief. He did not hesitate. He strode forward, his pace brisk and purposeful, directly toward her. He ignored the gunnery sergeant. He ignored the other guards. He stopped exactly 3 feet in front of her, his back ramrod straight. And then, the 4-star commander of Western Aerospace Defense, a man who had briefed presidents and commanded armies, snapped to the most rigid, impeccable position of attention possible. It was a gesture of profound, almost shocking, deference. His voice, a legendary roar that had dressed down colonels and senators, boomed across the now quiet compound, imbued with a respect that bordered on reverence. "Dr. Thorne, attention on deck!" Out of pure, conditioned reflex, Gunny Hackett and every other Marine present snapped to attention. Their spines straightened, their chins tucked, their eyes locked forward. The command had not been directed at them, but its power was absolute. They stood there, ramrod straight, their minds struggling to process the impossible scene unfolding before them. A 4-star general was standing at attention for a civilian, for the woman Hackett had just threatened to arrest. General Wallace did not relax. "Report, Doctor," he commanded, his eyes fixed on her. "The microburst triggered a flaw in the power regulation software for Substation 7, General," Thorne stated, her voice returning to its calm, analytical tone. It created a feedback loop that corrupted the primary command server and cascaded through every networked system. "I've isolated the damaged sectors, purged the malicious code, and restored primary functions from a hardened backup. The system is stable, but vulnerable. We will need to perform a full diagnostic and patch the vulnerability before a similar weather event can exploit it again." The gunnery sergeant and his men acted effectively under my direction once the situation was properly diagnosed. The casual, last-minute inclusion of his name was like a physical blow to Hackett. She was protecting him. After he had treated her with such utter contempt, she was covering for him, folding his panicked, incorrect actions into her own narrative of cool competence. The magnanimity of it was more humbling than any rebuke. Wallace nodded, finally relaxing his stance. "I have a team of your people inbound from Vandenberg. The facility is yours until you declare it secure. Whatever you need, you have it." He finally turned his gaze to Hackett, and his eyes were chips of ice. He didn't need to be told what had happened here. He could read the scene like a book, the dust-covered rental car, the look of shell-shocked awe on the Marines' faces, and the legendary, unflappable calm of the woman standing before him. "Gunnery Sergeant," the general said, his voice dangerously quiet. "General!" Hackett barked, his body rigid. "Do you have any idea who this is?" Wallace asked, his voice soft, but carrying the weight of an impending orbital strike. Hackett's mind was a blank. He could only see the name on the ID card. "Dr. Thorne, sir." Wallace let out a short, sharp breath that was not a laugh. "That is Dr. Eris Thorne. She is not a contractor. She is not a visiting academic. She is the civilian director of the Advanced Defense Systems Initiative. Her call sign, which you heard on the comms, is Chimera. And that clearance you saw? Omega. It's not just a classification. It is a statement of authority. It means that within the perimeter of any facility running her architecture, which includes this one, her authority is absolute and supersedes all military rank. All of it. From a private to me." The words fell into the silence like anvils. The architect, the creator. She had not hacked the system. She was the system. The protocols that had confused him were the ones she had written. The back doors she used were the ones she had built. He had not been challenging a visitor. He had been standing at the gate of a cathedral, spitting on its architect, unaware that every stone and every wire answered to her will alone. He had committed an act of such profound, spectacular ignorance that it transcended mere insubordination and entered the realm of the theological. Later, after the storm had fully passed and the sky had returned to its indifferent blue, the facility was a hive of quiet, focused activity. Teams of technicians in clean suits, the ones General Wallace had mentioned, swarmed the ECP, their movements precise and efficient. They treated Dr. Thorne with a deference that was almost religious, listening to her quiet instructions as if they were divine commandments. Thorne found Gunny Hackett in the ECP guard shack. He was sitting on a small stool, staring at his hands. The bravado, the swagger, the atmospheric certainty that had defined him were gone. He looked hollowed out, a man whose entire conception of the world had been dismantled in the space of 20 minutes. He stood when she entered, his movements stiff and formal. "Ma'am," he said. The word was unfamiliar in his mouth. She did not sit. She stood before him, her expression as neutral and analytical as ever. "Gunnery Sergeant," she began, her tone clinical. "I have reviewed your service record. It is exemplary. Multiple combat decorations, consistently high fitness reports, and commendations for leadership. You are, by every metric the Marine Corps values, a model Marine." Hackett said nothing. He did not know what to say. This was not the beginning of the dressing down he had expected, the one he knew he deserved. "Your failure today," she continued, "was not a failure of character or courage or discipline. It was a failure of imagination. You have been trained to see the world as a spectrum of identifiable, uniformed threats. Your cognitive framework is built around a visible, physical hierarchy. You saw a woman in a civilian car, and your brain categorized her as non-threat, low status. Every subsequent action you took was based on that initial, flawed assessment." She took a small step closer, and her gaze was so intense it felt like a physical weight. "In a combat zone, Gunnery Sergeant, a failure of imagination gets you and your people killed. Underestimating an enemy because they do not look or act the way you expect is a fatal error. Today, the threat was not a person. It was a systemic collapse. But your response was the same. You defaulted to your training and your assumptions, and in doing so, you failed to correctly identify the nature of the crisis or the nature of the primary asset available to solve it." She paused, letting the words sink in. "In my world, that kind of failure is not a disciplinary issue. It is a critical threat condition. It is a vulnerability in the system." "And vulnerabilities," she finished, her voice dropping almost to a whisper, "must be patched." Hackett finally found his voice. It was hoarse. "I'll pack my bags, ma'am. I assume I'm being reassigned. Or worse." "Worse?" A flicker of something, perhaps dry amusement, touched her lips for a nanosecond. "No, Gunnery Sergeant. A court-martial or a punitive reassignment would be a waste of your 20 years of experience. It would treat the symptom, not the disease. I am not interested in punishment. I am interested in education." She tapped a command into a small tablet she was holding. "Effective 0800 tomorrow. You are reassigned by order of the Director of the Advanced Defense Systems Initiative. Your new duty station is my personal staff. You will be my executive military liaison for the next 18 months. You will travel with me. You will sit in my meetings. You will see how the systems you guard are designed, how the threats you prepare for are analyzed, and how the strategies you execute are born. You will learn to see the world not as a battlefield of uniforms, but as a system of interconnected variables. Your education, Gunnery Sergeant Hackett, begins now. He stared at her, dumbfounded. It was a punishment of a kind he could never have conceived. He was not being banished to a forgotten outpost or demoted. He was being forcibly enlightened. He was being chained to the very perspective he had so arrogantly dismissed, compelled to learn the language of the world he had refused to see. It was a sentence of profound, inescapable, and ultimately transformative humility. The story of that day at the ECP passed into the institutional lore of Cerberus' Deep Range. It became a modern fable, a teaching tool told to every new soldier, airman, and Marine assigned to the facility. It was known as Hackett's Storm, or sometimes the day the gunny met the ghost in the machine. And like all legends, it grew with each telling, but its core, essential truth remained unchanged. Do not judge by appearances. Years passed. At the Marine Corps base in Quantico, Virginia, where the next generation of leaders was forged, a master gunnery sergeant stood before a class of newly minted second lieutenants. He was older, leaner, his remaining hair almost entirely white. The belligerence in his jaw had been replaced by a quiet, thoughtful intensity. His presence commanded not fear, but a deep and abiding respect. It was Rex Hackett. He was one of the most sought-after instructors at the officers' school, known for his unconventional lectures on strategy and threat assessment. He finished every course the same way, by telling a story. He told them of a day in the Nevada desert, of his own arrogance, his own blindness. He told them of a beige rental car and a quiet woman he had completely underestimated. He painted a vivid picture of his own public, catastrophic failure. The greatest threat you will ever face, he told the rapt young officers, his voice low and steady, is your own certainty. It is the comforting, deadly assumption that the world works exactly the way you think it does. It is the belief that threats will always announce themselves in ways you expect. I am here to tell you that in the 21st century, the most significant threats, the most powerful forces, will almost certainly be the ones you do not see, the ones you dismiss, the ones that do not fit your preconceived notions of what power and authority look like. He looked out at their young, eager faces. Your job as leaders is not just to command, but to see, to perceive, to have the humility to recognize that the most important person in the room might not be the one with the most rank on their collar. It might be the quiet civilian in the corner who understands the system better than anyone else. I learned that lesson the hard way. My job is to make sure you do not have to. The story of Dr. Aris Thorne and Gunnery Sergeant Rex Hackett is more than just a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride. It is a parable for a new era of power, an era where the lines between warrior and scholar, between physical force and intellectual mastery, have become irrevocably blurred. True strength, the kind that can command chaos and impose order on a failing world, is no longer the sole province of the loud and the uniformed. It is not announced with a shout, but with a quiet, undeniable display of competence. Authority, in its purest form, is not granted by a title or a badge. It is not seized through intimidation or volume. It is the natural consequence of superior understanding. It is the quiet confidence of the person who not only knows how to play the game, but who designed the board, wrote the rules, and can see 10 moves ahead while everyone else is still trying to figure out their first. It is the lesson that substance will always, in the end, triumph over style, and that quiet, focused action is the most powerful argument of all. It is a reminder to look past the surface, to question our assumptions, and to have the wisdom to recognize mastery when it appears before us. even if it arrives in a dusty, beige rental car.